now live on Facebook for our fifth Power Chat. This one is with our dear friend, composer, collaborator, Paula Matthusen, who we've been fortunate to work on a number of projects now, and are now, as of yesterday, in the process of a new thing, but that is super secret, so we won't say anything about it until it becomes a thing. Paula, thank you so much for joining us. These projects have been really, really fun. It's just been like a great sort of excuse to hang out with our friends. Um,
Yeah,
so,
thank you for having me on Power Chats. These are amazing. I've been loving them. Like it's so great to be with you all and like to have these just enjoying so many wonderful conversations with really amazing composers and musicians and performers. So this is
it's
fantastic. I'm
it's
totally
been a
honored.
real well, and we are likewise honored by your presence with us. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the first piece that you wrote for us, Old Fires Catch Old Buildings. And there were a number of things that I think are really fascinating and beautiful about the piece, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the connection between analog technology and digital technology that you used both in this piece, but I think you use fairly regularly in your work.
Certainly, yes. Happy to. That piece had a lot of steps and parts in it because it's all of you performing with each of your own cassette recorders that each have their own unique individual cassette that you recorded a number of separate parts that were then sort of move around those different recorders, and then it also has a fixed media track that goes with it as well. And so, I mean, on a basic level, I'm really interested in the fallibility of technologies and different media, and each one kind of has its own kind of special characteristic. And for cassette recorders, at least, that's the technology a bit of my childhood. I think that's what really got me into electronics initially. So it has a certain nostalgia to it for me, but it also is really interesting to treat as a sounding body in a space. And that's something that I'm interested in as well, like different speaker configurations that are, like unusual, because there's a really interesting dialogue that happens with you all as performers, then these cassette recorders, and then this sort of other space that can be created by the sort of frequencies response and characteristics of a more powerful PA system. And I think it's interesting to kind of disrupt what we expect from sort of stereo placement of things and sort of play with the delicacy of sonic interactions that can happen in these intermediary levels. And then, I mean, certainly in this case, it has a direct visual reference to me for a piece that always stayed with me, which is the Samuel Beckett play, Krapp's Last Tape, in which the person, Krapp, the main, is his 69-year-old self in conversation with a recorded part of himself from 30 years prior. And so there's that reference to, so that it's sort of playing with an earlier version of yourself and one that ages differently. And that's one thing that has been interesting with that piece as well, is that um, well, first of all, I was really excited that you all were game to carry around 4 cassette recorders with you everywhere you go with those. So thank you.
We picked up a new suitcase to facilitate your piece.
Thank you. um, and that was part of the reference, and so they go out of tune, and they all these sort of issues of sync and temporality kind of come into that as well. And then the other part of that is where the title comes from, is the William Burroughs Invisible Generation, where he's talking a lot about things related to the cut-up technique, but also then that tape recorders are there's all these sort of ways that they're addressed and sort of become normalized as part of social exchanges, and also these kind of power dynamics that are really interesting. And so that was some of those things that I was kind of interested in playing with as part of that.
That's great. I wonder, part of what we did in the process of the pieces, you had asked us to record just a bunch of stuff. You had given us some little excerpts that you wanted us to record, and made it clear that the quality of the recording didn't matter so much. You just needed this material. I wonder, when you ask for that and you receive hours and hours of recorded material from artists, like, for us specifically for this piece, what are you looking for, or how do you go about kind of sifting through all of that material to decide exactly sort of what you need or what's right?
Well, there's part of that that's practical and part of that that is coloristic. And so both of those things, like I like playing it in terms of a timbral thing. And so it depends, like, some of those things too, where, I mean, that was where I got the idea in some of those recordings too. I was like, wow, Jeff can sing really, really, really high. So like, like putting that as part of the, having that sort of solo with backwards Norwegian in the middle of that came out through part of that, because it was playing with the material as something that is flexible. And so, I play a lot with live electronics as well. So like taking the material as sort of something that you can both edit and work with, but also something that you can play with, then allows me to get familiar with with the sounds and with how you approach materials as well. And I think it's interesting in terms of hearing what environments are there. Like I like noise profiles in recordings a lot. Part of it is that like I'm sitting in my office and I have the sound of the air conditioner in the background and then all these other sort of vibrations. And there's sort of this thing of knowing that you're in a space in part because of the noises there. And I think that's also part of recording technologies too. Like I can't disassociate the sound of cassette without the sound of the tape hiss. And there's something about that that's very palpable, of it being its own kind of thing, but also comforting as a presence. So.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump back to, if you haven't heard Paula's piece for us, this first piece, Old Fires Catch Old Buildings, the title track off our last record, there's an incredible moment in it where the density of this texture that was all four of us playing live and 4 cassettes with sort of like transformed and edited versions of these previous recordings that we were making, as well as a stereo tape fixed media part playing in the speakers. All of that drops out, and then I end up just duetting with myself in what, as Paula said, is backwards Norwegian. So I wanted to ask you about this text that you've used in both Old Fires and our newer piece, the sort of Concerto Grosso for Loadbang and Strings that we're partway through the recording process of. What's the importance of this text to you? Why have you chosen to work with it several times?
It appears in a lot of pieces of mine. The source is, it's a Norwegian table prayer. And it's one that I've been interested in. It's familiar to me. It's one that we grew up speaking and that we'd say every now and then around the dinner table. Because and what interests me about it in part is that it is it has a sort of kind of ritual aspect to it in a way, but it also, none of us speak Norwegian, so like it's intriguing to me in that regard, that it sort of comes from my grandmother. So it's also a nice kind of shout out to her. But like it's then something that has that connection. It registers as language, like in a specific context, and so like but then can sort of fan out from that. And so it's phonemes and sounds and things like that sound as language, but are like, when chopped up and then like used in all these other sort of contexts, I think like sound as, like, I'm interested in that, something that sounds as language but isn't a specific word per se. That or it is a specific word but not a sentence as we would traditionally like think of it. And so so that tends to interest me. Other times I will work with text directly, but usually that's in a sort of collaborative thing where it is very much about the text. But so like every now and then someone who speaks Norwegian fluently will be in the audience and I'll be like, what is happening? Like,
Right, because I'm really interested in the idea of there's a sort of interesting tension in that idea to me, that you have something that's both very personal and like a sort of like connection through your family, but that is also being treated sort of as almost like an alienated object. Like it's this thing that you've drawn from an important place in your life that then has like bloomed in its own direction. I think that's really interesting.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, and when you set texts and work with texts otherwise, do you find that you set them with a focus on sort of wholeness or comprehensibility, or is there the kind of chopping and atomizing that you've done with this text in these pieces?
It depends on the nature of it. Like, so one of the last times I worked with text in recent memory was for Experiments in Opera, which was an amazing experience. It was such a wonderful group to work with. And it was this wonderful libretto by M. Holmes. And so like, that was very much about keeping it intact, you know, because it's a libretto. So like, but then other times, what is it? There's the Schumann Frauenmusik. It's anyway. I'm gonna diverge and go too far away. But it was like the last poem of a song cycle on woman's love and life. That you know.
Yeah, Frauenliebe und Leben.
Yes.
The Chamisso text, yeah.
And then so the last poem of that was not set by Schumann, but like I couldn't get around the poem for it. Like I just couldn't. It was horrible. Like so I like came up with a strategy of like going through and finding where words appear in other parts of the poem, and then so that's taking out words like love and blah, all that sort of stuff, and then it's leaving the things that are specific to that, and then that's like, okay, so what makes this poem focus on those words, and then using that as a way to kind of zero in on something that takes the language and breaks it apart. And I was interested in that in particular too, because this is literally an instance in which you're talking about like only men writing about women's love and life, you know, so it's like a way of disrupting that and playing with some of those things.
Paula, I wanted to jump in, and we've talked about your connection to family, connection to text, sounds, and these are larger things. I wanted to narrow down into the titles that you use. Most of your titles are very poetic. The All Buildings Catch All Fires, and the last piece we played of yours, Such Is Now the Necessity. This is a two-part question. What's the inspiration, and how do you connect the title to your piece? And what comes first? Is it the title, or the title comes after you've written the music?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm glad that you like the titles. And for them, most of the time I can't take credit for them because they are actually from poets. So like, I spend, and I usually like try and reference that in the program notes and things like that too, because part of it is I love poetry, right? So, and so something will hit me as a particular sentiment, and then I'll walk around with it for a while. And so when the opportunity sort of presents itself for a piece or something like that, if it's something I've already been thinking of, then I'll sort of be like, oh, that, you know, that really feels like it fits with the particular sentiment for this piece. So Old Fires Catch Old Buildings, like I knew that Invisible Generation was in there someplace before starting that piece, which is where that comes from. Such As Now the Necessity is part of a series of 3 pieces where the titles come from the Declaration of Independence. And then, and I draw a lot from like Naomi Shihab Nye, Mary Oliver, and then I also have a series of feedback pieces that are drawn from Peter Gitzi, who did a collection called Archaeophonics, which is really wonderful. And part of it was so fun too about like in the power chat and talking with Eve Buklarian about this too, is she has such extensive knowledge of poets and things like that too. It's really fun to hear what people are reading in this regard too, because it's all in the air.
When you're reading poets, are you like, do you have a sort of, you know, people talk about the photographer's eye, where if you are someone who takes a lot of pictures, you start to look at situations as like potential photographs. Do you find yourself at all when you're reading poetry like, ooh, that's a juicy one, like that's gonna be a title sometime soon?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good way. I mean, I'm not like, ooh, juicy, yes, but like, you know. But I mean, I think there are certain things where like something, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, why does a title appeal to us? And I think that, so like, I can't really take credit for it, right? Like, it's something that someone else has thought of, that like, who spends time really thinking about words in this way. And then, so of course, that's what they're doing, and they're like brilliant at it. And so then like it hits us, and then we think like, oh, that's interesting. How does this pan out into this other way of thinking about it through sound, through, you know, all these other things. And so that's something that interests me through that. Yeah.
Hi, Paula. Kind of going back to how you think of text and how you think of all your settings and how you incorporate technology, I notice how all those things come together is in how there's a sense of holding space for performers in your music. And I found that when we've improvised together, it tends to be the same feeling, that you leave a lot of room for collaboration. Sometimes when composers leave room like that in maybe more of a cage sense, there's like a sense that you could subvert the system if you wanted to, if you disagree with it. But when we play your music, I find that it's just really warm and inviting to kind of fold yourself into the atmosphere that you've created. I find that to be really rare in a lot of compositional models. And sometimes I think of the way that composers come up with competitions and making their career path and being told you have to write these big pieces and impress everybody. I find that maybe a lot of composers lose that generosity of spirit. I'm really curious how you view holding space for performers and how you've developed into this keeping your generosity and collaborative spirit like through your career. If you
That's so sweet. Like, but I feel that from all of you too, right? So it's not a difficult thing, right? Like it's a thing of reciprocation and also trust. And like I'm really interested in those spaces of kindness that we can create for each other through this. And it's, you know, what's fun about doing stuff with the cassette recorders and things like that too, and just even all these little things that are not just like write a piece, send it out, and then it's done kind of thing, is that there's a certain slowness to it. And then that involves us all kind of getting to know each other as well. And so I think part of of the two of us improvising together too has been sort of that thing of like coming to get to know each other. And then, you know, so literally I have a noise synth with an open mic that just will not do anything until you respond. And then so it's like, and it's just exciting, you know. I really am invested in that in part too, because I think everyone we know, if we hang out with them long enough, will reveal some of their superpowers to us, right? Like, and so
that's a cool quote.
But if we you know, allowing space for that means that we get to kind of really have some sort of meaningful exchange that might be different than what we would expect otherwise, because and that this is part of that too. Like we get to sit down and like, you know, have a conversation. I was talking with Andy the other day. I was like, can't I just make you all cookies and like we can just hang out together? Because like, right, you know, there's something that feels very important about exercising care, which is beyond the performance, right? Everything that happens in rehearsal, like one of the best last musical experiences I had, right, pre-COVID times, was all of us in New Mexico together, and you know, that was so great, being able to be with you in the car, and then like, you know, and then I don't know, just it was such a beautiful moment, and I don't disassociate any of those activities as separate from the music that then happens on stage. Yeah.
Well, if I could also just follow it up really quickly, it does feel like a lot of the like music compositional industry complex, like it really does focus on like pushing people out and winning competitions and like these success stories where like somebody has to be put on a pedestal before succeeding at the expense of others. Like I get a feeling from talking to a lot of younger composers that they feel like that's kind of the model too. Did you ever feel a push and a pull with like wanting to be so collaborative, and like any pressures from like the industry at all?
No. No. I mean, it's funny because like even when I was in undergrad, right, like one of the really powerful experiences for me was starting a performance art group with a bunch of my classmates, which includes like Jeff Snyder, who's amazing. If you have come across his work, he's just so incredible. And Ryan Ross Smith, who's also awesome, and Morgan Luker, and like just like really Christian Zamora, Sarah Florino, like these people that really kind of like, so we'd go and write our string quartets, and then the next day we do performance where like Ryan would be breaking glass and like duct taping it to himself while like Jeff is doing crazy stuff with sampler, and it's just like, it's stuff that, like both of those were really like, there's no play, like that's not gonna like be booked for 7 world tours suddenly, you know what I mean? Like, but it was a really, like there's something about finding that, which is like, once you have contact with it, you kind of want to keep doing it. And so one of the things that we did too was, when Pauline Alvaros had her Lincoln Out of Doors Festival, her lunar opera, all of us hopped in a car and like drove over and like were a mythical amoeba together, like, and crawled under a tarp for 5 hours, and then the blazing hot August sun, and then burst out of it in these great, and so it's like, and I remember having that moment of being like under the tarp with each other and be like, wow, this is amazing. Like all of us are like, this is like amazingly intimate and like musical and like all this, but like she created that space for us to do that too, right? Like, so there's part of that where it's just like, we can keep doing that and there are spaces to find it, but it's not like one direct linear path. And a lot of times, like part of the, a lot of the music and sort of things that I'm drawn to as well are things that sort of find their own path, but aren't, but there's a lot that points out that's so intriguing, because it's not linear, if someone is telling you something like, these are the top 12 steps to like, write your symphony orchestra piece, da da da, when I think, and then then I'm suspicious, right? Like, but there's, if any of that makes sense.
Totally. And I think there's like a non-linearity in a lot of I mean, we still have time codes and we're still moving through the piece in a certain way. But I feel like, especially with Old Fires, we have this like sort of flux of material that like we eventually go to a place together, but we don't all always go in the same way. And, I might be moving from one cell towards another, or like back and forth between them over a certain amount of time. So I love that is part of the way that you're thinking about your compositional life and your performing too, that there's like, we're not we're not all going in one direction all the time. We're opening that up and we're finding where to go. Did you have, aside from that collaboration that you're talking about inspiring the way that you wanted to work, was there any sort of earlier musical experiences that you think back to in your life that you connect to now, like something that, high school or earlier that feels like you still hang on to it?
Well, some from different, each one's, certainly. I'm so curious, of course, to know what all of yours is like too. So I would love to throw that question back to all of you as well. But yeah, I mean, my father worked in radio. My mother is a cellist who taught in the public schools, and so like having sound around the house was definitely a huge part of it. So Bach, she was always playing Bach in the room next door, and so that's like one of my earliest memories. But I grew up in Arizona, so also one of my earliest memories was the sound of the air conditioning firing up, like, and the sound of I-10 nearby. So like these things that are like, I might be explain some of my fondness for drones, but I think that, we have attachments to sound in a way that aren't necessarily specifically musical, but are like powerful because they imply a certain quality of home for us. Yeah.
I wonder, so we had a conversation last week with Mark Applebaum, and he brought up this really beautiful idea that has been super helpful for me personally in like the last week. And it's this idea of what about reframing what we're going through now as from what very easily could be thought of as suboptimal, but how could you reframe it to being actually super optimal in terms of working and creating new things that we may have never thought to do before because now the circumstances are different? How have since our time off from normal life, what have you been doing creatively, or did you find the need to take a break, or has it offered some time to explore new things?
Interesting. I mean, I think there's part of it I mean, it's always fun to turn things around to see, like, given constraint, what is movement within that can, you know, what are the sort of creative possibilities within that. And so, for the, immediately after March 12th, like for me, a lot of things like sort of switched in terms of trying to keep things moving with the ensemble I direct at Wesleyan, which is Tone Burst, and then the laptop ensemble. And then so suddenly everything becomes this, like, and people made really beautiful. I was so impressed by what members of the ensemble did for that class. And part of it was really figuring things out in real time. And so, I think there's part of it too, which is kind of trying to see, like, what is this space, which I think is part of what we're still figuring out, like, what is this Zoom space too, or like, what is enabled, because like, we're both more distant and more intimate. So like, I can see what's in all of the backgrounds of where you are right now. I'm like, oh, it's a nice picture, like, or, great curtains, that book looks really interesting. but at the same time, we're much more distant from each other because I can't, hear what's happening in your environment. So in the same way, because this is all mediated and optimized towards voice and auto ducking out everything else. So like, as part of it, it's like, okay. So knowing that, like, what kind of fun distortions can we play with this way to sort of subvert it, which is sort of the top secret thing I want to try with y'all that Andy was talking about. But like,
the cat is halfway out of the bag.
But I still I'm thinking about these issues. I think it's really interesting to see how everyone is doing this. And I mean, I think part of that is to recognize that we're not going to have the things that are, not just seeing things for what they aren't and then being frustrated by them, but seeing things for what they are, and then what we can do that we would do as people engaged with sound and creative people, and like that we can sort of figure out how we can still play and engage in this way, because we do have something to offer. We're musicians. We have something to offer in all this. And so like, and what we think of is going to be different because we're different, and everyone, like, has a sort of different way of working their brains around this. So figuring out how we're going to continue to make sound together through this and be creative through this, I think is really, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I'm not going to say that there are times where I'm not like, this sucks, because I definitely had that too, but like, but a lot of the times I'm really impressed by what people do. And I was just like, in a couple of months, seeing like even with the laptop ensemble, seeing how people thought their way around that, I was really, really impressed with it. So I think people will be coming up with really, really, beautiful things. And yeah.
As a person that teaches, I know we only have 2 minutes, so but you're, in addition to being like this great composer, you're also this great pedagogue and teaching all of these people. And has it changed the way that you think about like what our responsibility is as educators? Not, I mean, separate from the sort of logistics of presenting information, but like it has flipped everything upside down in a way that's like, it can make you think a little bit about like, wait, what are we actually doing here? Like, what's the objective?
Yeah, I mean, I the answers are in your question, I feel like, right? I mean, part of it is that since so many things have been upended, I mean, we're always trying to figure it out, right? Like, if I were to come into the classroom and be like, I've got everything planned and totally figured out, like, it would not go well. Like, so I think there's part of it, which is leaving space, right? And I mean, that's something I like, that takes practice too, like, so that's, and I learned from a lot of people from that too. So, and I mean, I'm really grateful to be around a number of great teachers. Watching all of you teach too is like really inspiring to me. And so I think you see it, right? Like, you see, we can all remember the first teachers we had that like made us like, just like get so excited. And so like, there's part of that, which I think like we're all in some ways, like we're accessing both as musicians and as teachers when we go out into the world. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm excited and nervous and all the other sort of things, because school starts in 2 weeks for us. And that's always like I've never stopped being nervous for the first day of school ever. Like since I was like 5, I was nervous for the first day of school. So like it's just accepting that and giving oneself over to it, So
Paula, thank you so much for agreeing to spend a half hour of a Monday evening with us. It was super fun, as is all of our hangs, though this one's a little bit different from being smushed into a rental car in Albuquerque. This will have to do for now. But thank you. Thanks to everybody who listened on Facebook. And we will be sending out the details of our next one, which will be with Chaya Chernovin in a couple weeks. So thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Paula.
thank you.
And we will see you all soon.